Providence looked at that as a far enough outpost that it'd be really hard to defend. Perhaps from a strategic standpoint, you need to have both the facility as well as the ambulatory services and the physician base. And so it felt like they didn't have enough strength in any one of those areas. Hi, welcome everybody to a very special edition of the System Logic podcast. This is our news episode for this season. We're going to be investigating some of the really interesting news events from modern medicine to evaluate how they impact administrative teams, how they impact medical groups, and the technology that drives them. As you know, I'm Jason Lee, the host, and today my co-host is my colleague and friend, Jared Steele.
Hi, Jason. Happy to be here.
So, Jared, a few weeks ago, I was looking at some news about our home region here in Northern California, and I came across the item about North Bay Healthcare. You may recall them from some work that we did in the past, but they're taking over ownership of Queen of the Valley Medical Center from Providence. Providence owned Queen of the Valley. They're selling them to North Bay. And it got me thinking, boy, I've been hearing a lot about M&A activity the last couple of quarters, right? And so I looked it up, and according to a recent consulting publication on M&A activity, there were 22 announced mergers and acquisitions in Q1 for 2026. You know what? How long it's been since we've had that much activity? Since right before COVID, Q1 2020. It's been a very long time. And, as I was looking at the list, the interesting thing about these transactions has been, it seems like systems are being very selective about the acquisitions, and in fact, mostly divestitures, perhaps pruning sites, groups, hospitals that are not central to some of their strategies. They're divesting some of these pieces. So, it was a really interesting topic, and I thought it'd be great something for us to talk about today.
For sure. Yeah, this is something that you and I talk about on the road and when we're just kind of talking shop. And what's interesting, what I saw was a dip in M&A and transactions about a year ago. So the end of 2024, the beginning of 2025, there seemed to be a dip, and then it pretty quickly ramped back up into late 2025. And to your point, it continues to move forward. And what I observed as I was just going through some of the pro formas and different schedules on transactions, there was a long period of time where it was a lot of roll up, a lot of small transactions, a lot of the big roll up and consolidation of the independent practice. And so that, from a deal volume standpoint, that drove a lot of volume. But what we're seeing now is much more volume and bigger transactions, larger roll up, the full health systems or larger practices. So the size of the deals are bigger, and they all seem to be ramping up again. So, we've been talking about this regularly. So we thought we'd come together, and a couple of the deals that we thought we would chat a little bit about today and just opine on are definitely Sutter Health and Allina. There's a lot of connectivity we have there. So interesting to unpack that. Sanford Health with North Memorial Health, and then Kaiser and the Renown joint venture. So just a couple of key deals that we thought we would chat about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that are not familiar, that are listening in today, a few months ago, Sutter Health and Allina announced a major, roughly $26 billion cross-market transaction. Sutter has 27 some odd hospitals here in California and beyond, about 15,000 affiliated physicians, while Allina has 12 hospitals, 90 some odd clinics, and hundreds and if not thousands of physicians also under their umbrella. So the combined network is going to be spanning 39 hospitals, 400 some odd care sites, serving, 5 million patients across multiple states, Minneapolis, Minnesota, the central north part of the country, as well as California here on the West Coast. And so, according to the press release, the rationale was centered on building a healthcare innovation engine that leverages Sutter's digital AI capacities and Allina's regional medtech hubs to expand care access while deploying automated solutions that reduce administrative burden for caregivers. So that's at least ostensibly what the press release was saying. So Jared, what did you think?
I love this deal. You love this deal. These are two organizations that we know a lot about, and I think it's great. You and I have both been longtime consultants at Sutter. It's interesting because when you're an advisor for a large health system, you find as the years go on and as even the decades go on, you realize that you've been a part of the organization longer than a lot of the administrators. The administrators turn over, they move organization. And at some point you realize, wow, like we're still around, we're still spending time with these organizations and doing work with them. And that's exactly I think how both of us feel about Sutter. You're in the Bay Area. I spent most of my career there. And so we have a lot of affinity for Sutter, all of the medical groups, all of the organizations there. We've seen them build Sutter Shared Services, which is a wonderful operating division. And so as we think a lot about the future of this organization and where they're going, when they announced this alignment, I just thought it was awesome. Align is another organization that I have a big affinity for. I remember when I was in college at the University of Utah, I was part of the University of Utah healthcare systems value engineering team, which was kind of this like lean, Toyota, Virginia Mason operations team. And one of my mentors there, a really sharp senior value engineer, he was from the Dakotas and he left the organization to go to Alina to be kind of an ops guy, an improvement guy. And then he was basically rebadged to Health Catalyst. Health Catalyst is a really sharp healthcare analytics and IT MSO organization out of Salt Lake City. And Alina is one of their big MSO clients. So Health Catalyst services all sorts of data infrastructure for Alina. They do all sorts of data processing, analytics, process improvement. And so that's an organization that I've followed for a long time. They do just really great work. And they've had a long standing, it's been over a decade or so that they've been at Alina. This mentor of mine, so he was there, then he moved over to the Health Catalyst side, but to still work for Alina. And I've just kept a really close eye on both organizations, where they're moving. And then so to see them coming together, I thought was awesome.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does seem like two very solid organizations coming together. Obviously, one of the oddities of this deal is the lack of contiguity, right? I mean, you've got a Minnesota entity, you've got a California entity, you got a lot of real estate, a lot of populations in between. As I was looking at the deal, I was thinking, boy, how is this going to manifest in either improved financial performance or savings or some other type of market position? Do you think it's tied in part to that, or do you think that, maybe it's just a merger where organizations coming together, seeing like similar type of organizations with a similar care delivery goal and an opportunity to continue to build on platforms and build on size?
It's definitely speculation, but you have to imagine these organizations, they're both kind of on that second, layer out of these mega health systems. And when you see them coming together and you see what was the hospital count between the two of them?
Yeah, so Sutter is about 27 or so, and Alina is about 12. So
now
all
we're
in
talking about
is
40
close to
hospitals.
40 hospitals. Yeah.
And so now you're starting to get into the mega system volume, right? You're starting to get closer to a Trinity and a Providence, and maybe not quite an Ascension or a Common Spirit, but you're definitely
Right.
getting closer and
Yeah.
closer to that mega system volume. And so we were speculating that there could be a future where they, cross the divide between the Northern California and the upper Midwest. And so I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And you think about one of the deals that we're going to be talking about here in a moment, where from a geography standpoint, the Dakotas and the Montana and the Idahos out there, somebody like a Sanford might eventually be a target going forward. But we'll talk a little bit more about those guys in a second. But one of the big possible partners, what do you think about maybe coming across the great state of Utah and maybe having some type of affiliation with Intermountain?
I think it's interesting. I mean, you begin to think about a Sutter, Alina, Sanford, Intermountain type enterprise, and I mean that would just be amazing. So we're just kind of
Definitely in range with the Common Spirit for sure at that point.
Yeah, that would be pretty powerful. Nobody else is kind of crossing over that northwest corridor of the country, and so that would be pretty interesting. We'll see how things shake out as the years go on, but typically, I know we're going to talk about a few divestitures, but typically folks are rolling to get larger and larger, and so
Yeah, I
That
think
that
that's
was the
right. And
first thing I thought about. As you know, when this was announced, it was like, okay, who's next? And Sanford came to mind first, and then Intermountain.
yeah, for sure. And the other thing that I was thinking about too is because they're not contiguous, you definitely have probably less regulatory scrutiny on the deal because people aren't going to be as
Yeah.
afraid of, dominating one particular state or broad region. But at the same time, you're also not really positioning yourself that well yet for a health plan negotiation because you don't
Yeah.
have too many payers that have members in both of those markets. So you're not going to be going up against a Premera, Blue Cross Blue Shield, or some regional anthem player where they've got several states that are contiguous. And so the fact that you've got a California-based entity and a Minnesota-based entity, you don't got too many health plans that have both of those markets in place. So I wonder if that was part of the consideration at all. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you would definitely know about the health plan side better than I would. What I was thinking about is the physician enterprise side. So
Hmm.
how does this translate and trickle all the way? The medical group and the physician enterprise is typically the last branch that kind of gets shaken with these mergers. They're pretty insulated as business units, right? Like
Hmm.
you look at Common Spirit, there's been the Catholic Health and Dignity roll up for a while, and you still have medical groups that are still very autonomous. Everything branding contracts are still very local to the medical group. So
Hmm.
what do you think about how this impacts the physician enterprise for both organizations?
Yeah, no, I got to imagine that there'll be some interesting shared knowledge from a clinical delivery standpoint. I bet you there probably is some efforts around how do we change or improve the governance of the medical groups? How do we change or improve the delivery of care from perhaps a value-based care orientation? I think there's a lot of things that could be learned from the clinical side, but also I think from an operational side too, right? And so if the clinic operations differ, there will be some learnings and some improvements there. I bet you they're able to squeeze a few percentage points of both efficiency and productivity out of this merger from that perspective. I also wonder if, you and I both have spent many years thinking about how do you incentivize providers. And I wonder if there will be any shared learnings or shared model development across the two as it relates to how they incentivize providers, whether that's
Yeah,
through, direct productivity or quality incentives or what have you.
sure.
What do you think about some of the technology implications? Do you think there's going to be much challenges there? I bet you they're both not on the same instance of Epic, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And some of the other platforms, they're going to have quite a bit of integration work that goes on if and when they start having shared services across the two systems.
There has to be, that has to be a mega part of this. And I mentioned earlier on, Sutter Shared Services, S3 is a great operating infrastructure that Sutter uses as a shared service across the enterprise. So you have to imagine, and then Alina, I was also talking about Health Catalyst. They've had a very successful partnership there, running a lot of their data and infrastructure through Health Catalyst. And so, you have to imagine there's going to be major operational strategy there. Other things like big revenue cycle decisions. We saw Common Spirit make a big decision rolling back
Yes.
their outsourced revenue cycle program. So it'd be
Hmm.
interesting to see what the plan is there from some of these major administrative services, revenue cycle, IT,
Hmm.
patient management, things like that.
Yeah, my guess is that leadership probably tries to squeeze some dollars, at least initially, out of some shared contracting and some shared vendor agreements on the technology side, because I think that's an easy place to go. You often think about, but don't see some of the personnel savings as you would. Certainly, you're not going to be able to shave anything out of a care delivery standpoint. You're not shutting down any facilities because there's
Yeah.
no overlap of a footprint at all or service area at all. So that's not going to be an area that they would generate any savings from. But there could be definitely some shared service of questions and consolidations.
Well,
And
it's
who
interesting they
knows at the
mentioned
central leadership.
in the brief that you read that, part of the emphasis for Alina is its regional med tech hub. So, Minnesota is a huge med tech environment, and then you've
Hmm.
got Madison there as well. So
Absolutely.
that's in some way or another, they're factoring that into the calculus here. So yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, let's talk about another deal that's sort of related, and we mentioned earlier as from a geographic standpoint, the Sanford Health and North Memorial Health. That was definitely a merger agreement. Here are some statistics from the press release. Two entities coming together to form a single not-for-profit health system. Sanford, the much larger partner, of course, 58 hospitals, 55,000 some odd employees, including many thousands of physicians. North Memorial, much smaller, only 2 hospitals, so they're adding a very small footprint, but 6,500 employees. The Sanford system is infusing $500 million of investment to, $600 million of investment to sustain the level 1 trauma emergency services at one of the hospitals, Robbinsdale, and then double the size of the facility at Maple Grove. And so the press release emphasizes that they're coming together to battle rising costs, staffing shortages, and financial pressures, which would build a much stronger workforce pipeline to preserve essential care close to home. So something where two systems that are obviously contiguous and overlapping in Sanford and North Memorial. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, as you know, like we were talking about Sanford, another organization that we just really look at as a superstar in this space. And I don't know if we don't have the stats right in front of us. We could probably pull them real quick, but Sanford's been doing a lot of acquisition over the last few years,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they have a big geographical footprint to cover. And so when you think about their rural health footprint and them, trying to deliver care across the Dakotas and that whole region, it's got to be challenging from a rural health standpoint. And
For
so
sure.
I'm taking them at face value that these are all strategies to help ensure viability of care and can continue to operationalize these rural sites and these rural health systems because, we have a big rural program coming out. There's going to be an
Mm-hmm.
infusion of doublers. Folks are looking at a little bit of a lifeboat coming from that, but there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that these rural sites can deliver care. And so I think Sanford's being very strategic there. And think they're making the right decisions here to continue to consolidate smaller systems and build scale and build efficiencies.
Yeah, and you're obviously referencing the Rural Health Transformation Fund that came out of HR1 from 2025. We may be talking about that on a future episode, but I think as the rural health environment is still very unstable, right? We've got some changes in policy for coverage through Medicaid, certainly the healthcare exchanges, which covers a swath of membership that is just above the Medicaid population. They need care, they need some services. And in the states where we're talking about here, certainly the Dakotas, the Montanas, and the Idahos of the world, even, you've got a big geographic area. You're covering not very dense urban areas like Sutter and Alina might be covering. And so the delivery of care in those areas is very different. You asked me a question earlier about the medical groups and the ambulatory side of the house. What do you think that's going to impact, if any, these groups and what's going on in those northern states?
I think the medical group and the physician contracts stay pretty insulated, honestly, from the system. Even though their clinic may be rebranded and some of the there might be revenue cycle impacts, but it takes
Mm-hmm.
a long time to recontract a physician for physician services. You know what I'm saying? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
takes that just seems to be the final kind of piece, and the final part of any transaction is a recontract of your provider workforce. And so
Yeah.
while they'll probably be impacted because revenue cycle tends to change faster, and these organizations typically will reorganize their revenue cycle strategy and some of their contracts and things like that. The
Mm-hmm.
actual physician contracts for services stay pretty insulated. So I think they'll roll up into Sanford, and these other organizations will have a roll up of the medical group. But in terms of actually impacting their compensation, their funds flow to the medical group, I don't anticipate a lot of change for a while. What do you think on
Yeah.
that?
No, I think that's right. I think from a contracting standpoint, they're going to be able to improve some of the network rates because it is contiguous, unlike the other deal that we talked about. So from a health plan standpoint, you will get some improvement there. I think from a day-to-day operations standpoint, I think you're right. The medical groups probably will not see much impact. I'd venture to guess that a lot of the referral relationships will be largely untouched, but certainly something to think about, something that you could try to optimize if you have any kind of care coordination arm of Stanford that is looking at this deal as a way to continue to improve wellness, to continue to improve delivery of care for those populations. So I think it would probably be a net positive for particularly the North Memorial physicians in terms of the support that they have. The facilities might improve given the dollars that are being invested. And then ultimately that care coordination piece, I think, will help the flow of patients, help the referral base, help the secondary, tertiary care referrals that are needed by those populations. But I wonder if they will probably try to get some more savings out of not just the contracting piece that we talked about earlier, but also from a leadership standpoint. There's probably going to be
Mm,
some personnel changes here
yeah,
that
sure.
would result in some savings, I bet.
Yeah.
So as you think about the operating systems, you think about the technology piece, what would you advise? I mean, we've looked at a lot of groups where they're merging. Are there any words of advice that you would give to some of these medical groups as they're thinking about the integration? Because these are definitely going to be overlapping. They're definitely going to be integrating and changing their processes, and they might even get a whole new system that they have to use. So what are some of the things that you would provide from a consulting or advice standpoint, given some of your experience?
It's, all of these system changes they can drive fatigue. So I think you got to be really strategic around when you're going to change some of these technology systems and big
Mm-hmm.
processes. It's a big impact to, merge an organization. There's all these changes that are going to take place. There may be redundancies in administration that you got to figure out. And so when you then start thinking about, okay, what systems are we going to use? Whose are we going to prioritize? What are we going to roll up? I
Yeah.
think you just have to take it gently and be cautious, or you gotta go big bang, right? You either gotta rip the Band-Aid off and, hire Deloitte and get it done really fast and just
Yeah.
wipe the systems clean and bring in the new systems, or you have to do it pretty gently and do it strategically over time. But what you can't do is just kind of like start these things and just assume that you're going to spend the next 24 months slowly changing your EMR and slowly
Mm-hmm.
changing your HRIS system. And, we're going to meet once a week and we're going to kind of update this system and pull that data here and then send it there. Like, you either have to do it really aggressively all at once, or you have to, I don't know, kind of take a periodic change to it, or just kind of leave it alone and operationalize around it. But you do want to be careful not to over fatigue these organizations with more IT changes. Everyone's been implementing software for the last decade or two
Yeah.
decades. So you got to be careful on fatigue with IT changes and those types of things.
Yeah. We were talking the other day a lot about some AI and applying AI, particularly some of these agents that exist out there. I wonder if something like this might be an area where the healthcare system actually can take advantage near
Yeah,
term of some of the AI pieces. It's not clinical, it's purely operational.
that's true. Yeah.
Some transition of these systems can be done much more quickly through agentic stuff, working 24 hours a day, never sleeps. You don't have to bring in a gigantic
Yeah.
flotilla of consultants to get the job done.
Yeah, because a lot of it is that ETL, right? It's just like moving data around, getting it
Yep.
organized ways, trying to consolidate it. And so that is
Hmm.
that's a good use case for AI. I think you're spot on.
Yeah, and if you do it in a way where you're limiting the ability for the AI to escape or to bring in other data or to leak that data, if you're doing it all in a closed system, then you could protect a lot of the PHI or any other sensitive data that might be access to as you're thinking about that merger.
Definitely.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk about today too is a merger of a different sort. As you mentioned, Kaiser Permanente has been kind of on the prowl looking for partners. Started a few years ago with Geisinger, moved on to Cone Health, and more recently, about 5 or 6 months ago, they announced the joint venture with Renown Health. You and I are both familiar with Kaiser and Renown in Oakland and Reno, but I'll give you some stats from the press release here. So the joint venture was stated as a 50% majority interest acquisition in hometown health insurance arm of Renown, while Renown remains an independent, not-profit operating system for its hospitals, clinics, and trauma centers. So the merger is really with the health plan component, not so much with the actual care delivery arm. But published rationale highlights pairing the renowned local clinical footprint and reputation with Kaiser's national purchasing power, advanced digital skills, and most importantly, the value-based care model, the Kaiser VBC, if you will, to lower operational costs for local employers. What do you think the play is here for both Kaiser and Renown under this type of structure?
I like, how does this work exactly? Like how does the provider, like, I think you probably have a good sense for this. Like, how do they do this? How does the provider remain autonomous?
The health plan is selling over its share, and probably a lot of the care management and VBC functions will be taken over by Kaiser, and probably the Risant arm of Kaiser, which has been the transformation arm that took over some of the Geisinger and some of the Cone Health care delivery pieces. But my guess is that the advantage here for Kaiser is that they will improve or subsume the operations of the health plan, which could be a merger benefit to the health plan piece. Secondly, they implement some of the care delivery and savings clinical operational strategies in order to improve the performance of some of these risk-based contracts, and then leaving Renown so that Renown gets probably some infusion of dollars as an organization to do some facelift work, maybe some expansion work as an organization, and then they're delivering care. They've got a contract back with the other payers in the state, and then the improved financial performance of the health plan flows back to Renown on a 50-50 basis. I think that's probably the way that they're viewing this, at least based on the press release announcements. And, I guess you would got to think about how does the will the operational improvements that Kaiser is hoping to bring be sufficient to overcome any lack of nimbleness or changes that will be incumbent on Renown to undertake when they have a new contract with the health plan. So
Yeah.
I think those are some of the questions that are probably outstanding still as they look at the deal.
I don't know about this one as much. Does the juice become worth the squeeze from
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're trying to achieve? It sounds like a lot of funds flow, a lot of trading of hands,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to organize the services and the VBC and the bundles and the capitations, and because Renown will still have a large fee-for-service footprint, right? I mean, they're still going to have,
Yeah, Nevada Blue Shield, Blue Cross, right?
yeah, like how, what percentage of their revenue will still be tied to non-capitated, right? Like there's still going to be a
For
major
sure.
fee-for-service enterprise. So I've always, I've felt like for a long time, the 50-50 model is not a great idea from an operational standpoint. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
merits to both value-based care. I love the idea of a value-based care model and the principles of it. And if optimized, it's wonderful. It's the right way to do business for sure. It's the right way to do care delivery. But
Mm-hmm.
we built this house, we built this fee-for-service house, and so we're trying to kind of figure out how to move over. And that I am just not a believer in anything where you have a little bit of both. To me, it creates an insane amount of administrative complexity. I mean, we've spent a lot of time in
Mm-hmm.
the dollars, the contracts, and the data that flow through these enterprises. When you have both models happening concurrently,
Mm-hmm.
you basically just have to double everything. You got to double
Mm-hmm.
all of the contracting. You have to double all of the funds flow, all of the
Mm-hmm.
negotiations, all of the data management. And so I don't know. What do you think about this model? I mean, is this just we're going to take this first step and then Kaiser's going to look towards a full acquisition?
Yeah, I
Or
think that could be the case. It's interesting because of the most recent Kaiser acquisitions, Geisinger, of course, seems like the most closely aligned from a ethos standpoint, right? I mean, Geisinger had a very value-based care-oriented model and approach to care delivery, which is the staff model of Kaiser is, born out of that rationale. Cone, much closer as well, out in North Carolina area, definitely closer. Renown never struck me in all the time that we did work with Renown and the deals and the type of care delivery that I saw from that entity as particularly bought into a value-based orientation, certainly good quality, certainly well-serving of the Reno, Nevada area, but it never struck me as really closely aligned from a ethos standpoint with Kaiser. And so you wonder if maybe this is a test by Kaiser to say, okay, we're going to take over some of the health plan piece, and can we, through our transformation strategies and through our approaches, transform a health system that hasn't historically been a very deep value-based care oriented system into one that looks closer to a Kaiser, a Geisinger, or a Cone, maybe almost as a guinea pig in a way, and not in a bad way, but as a test case for deploying some of these on a broader scale and a larger scale.
Are they in Vegas? Is Kaiser in Vegas right now?
So Kaiser has some presence in Nevada, I believe, and certainly in the eastern Los Angeles area, they have quite a bit of Kaiser presence.
Were they in Reno? And is that so? Who else? Is there anyone else in Reno? Is that just a little bit of dignity there?
But Renown was certainly the largest player in that broader area. Yeah,
it'd be interesting. Yeah,
we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. And I know that the Kaiser goal is to take on a number of systems over the next several years and continue to extol the virtues of a Kaiser-oriented VBC model. And so we'll see what the next target is. And I know they've got lots of folks looking at all systems around the country to be the next acquisition target. So, and as you think about, those are some of the deals that we wanted to talk about specifically, but are there any others that have come up in your mind that you think that are particularly interesting for the audience, or that have been sticking in your craw in terms of why did they choose to do that particular arrangement?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about back to where we started actually with the Providence and Queen of the Valley and North Bay deal. So that, it's interesting that Providence is rolling back a facility. And there's a couple of things I think are interesting about it. For one, just Providence rolling back. So I'm going to be interested in your thoughts on, what are the signals there? Why, or and what reason would Providence be moving away? And then it's kind of interesting to me that North Bay was the one to take over, because when I think about the region, North Bay is an outlier, right? They're a small system. They've got like one hospital and a couple critical access, or a couple sites kind of in that that region between Sacramento and the East Bay. And so there's so many big systems in that market. So you think, UC Davis is right there, right? They're like
not that far.
They're like 20 miles to the east. UC Davis is 20 miles to the east, maybe 30 when you actually go all the way to Sacramento. And then obviously Kaiser's big on the East Bay and the whole region. You've got Common Spirit Dignity. So you've got some major systems in that market. And then Sutter, we were talking about Sutter, is there too. So it's just kind of interesting that North Bay was the one that was able to close the deal. It's pretty cool. Would like to learn more about that. And then, just curious about Providence exiting the market as well. And maybe that's a good decision for them. Maybe they feel like because of all those systems there, it's not worth the fight. It's not worth taking on those, pretty competitive. It's kind of a challenging market too. I mean, I've always felt like the Bay Area, this very well, but it's kind of a challenging market, a healthcare marketplace. It's kind of expensive. Provider services, it's hard to build the medical groups, and everything costs a lot. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with some of that analysis, because Providence as an entity seems like it's just going to continue to grow and swallow some other regions and other areas. But this is probably more like an example of what we were thinking about earlier on in the show, that, their systems are being more strategic about where they're growing and not just gobbling up as many facilities as possible. And that corridor that we're thinking about here, which is west of the Davis area, but not quite all the way to the Bay Area, that's a little bit of a tougher, because it's still growing. It's still kind of in between. And so you correctly identified a lot of the systems that are probably going to be trying to fight for that, right? The John Muirs, the Sutters, the Kaisers of the world that are going to be looking at that area. And perhaps Providence looked at that as a far enough outpost that it'd be really hard to defend. Perhaps from a strategic standpoint, you need to have both the facility as well as the ambulatory services and the physician base. And so if they felt like they didn't have enough strength in any one of those areas, then redoubling or reinforcing the Santa Rosa area where they do have a number of facilities. They've got a bunch of doctors in that area. Maybe that just made more sense for them to pull back some of the dollars. Don't try to invest in something that would be very challenging to hold and maintain and grow. And that's probably one of the key considerations of why they would do that.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think, you look at some of the other deals around, rural health is definitely going to be on the minds of a lot of systems throughout all of 2026 and beyond. Even the All True and Lake Region merger. I know that you had recently spent some time going through some of the systems in West Virginia and having, West Virginia Medicine taking on one of the hospitals, Uniontown Hospital out there. I think rural health
Yeah, I
and the
did. I
delivery of
drove
care.
to the great mountain state of West Virginia. It's a beautiful place, and
Yeah.
a lot of regional sites there. But they actually have recently moved up closer to Pittsburgh, and they brought
Okay.
on like 5 hospitals in kind of the outer Pittsburgh market. So
Hmm.
another system that's busy and growing, and a really strong system there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that in the future, we're going to have a lot more conversations about rural health. I think later on, this is going to be a topic and continue to be a topic in 2026 where a lot of health system leaders are going to be interested in it. A lot of health system leaders are going to be trying to ask some good strategic questions about what do we do with our nearby competitor or one of our outposts like a Queen of the Valley. So, Jared, I really appreciate you coming on today, talking a little bit about the topic of mergers and acquisitions on our season 1 news episode. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jason. Have a great week.
So that's been our episode of System Logic Podcast with my guest host, Jared Steele. We were talking a bit about the very active mergers and acquisitions marketplace here in healthcare industry for the last several months and quarters. And if you want to hear more conversations like this, please subscribe and like the System Logic Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.